Welcome to the Counselling Tutor podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counsellor Tutor podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and as always, my wingman in the world of intersubjectivity, Mr. Ken Kelly. How you doing, Ken?
I am so delighted to be here, and we have got such a great, dare I say, action-packed episode of the podcast for you today. A lot of really good stuff, some stuff that we've lifted from the Facebook group, the stuff that you guys are discussing. Rory has got something super special for you in theory today, where he's going to be looking at the hidden conditions. If you don't know what the hidden conditions are, you're going to love this. In skills, we're going to be having a good look at immediacy, which is sometimes an understood skill. Does that work? Understood?
It does, Ken.
Misunderstood or understood.
So as long as there's no English teachers around, we'll be fine, I think.
Well, it is the Counselling Tutor podcast.
Yes.
We're making this, if we kind of pull back the curtain of mystery, we obviously make them before they go live. We're not making it as you listen to it. It's not live radio. And we're making this during the break, the Easter break at the moment. So, a little bit of rest in between doing the Counselling Tutor podcast. But we got a really interesting topic to kick us off today with. Rory, do you want to let us know what that is?
Yeah, well, the topic we're going to kick off with, and it's been in the Facebook group. So if you want to go to our lively Facebook group, if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, remember there's one L in counselling. It's spelled
two L's.
Oh,
it's two L's. Now we really hope there's no English teachers listening.
yeah, so I'll say it's two L's, www.counsellingtutor.com. It's two L's, not one L.
Yeah,
as in the American. Yes, I've lost it a bit with the spelling today. And if you go to the top right hand side, you'll see Facebook. If you click on that, it's a closed group. Just ask to join, and you can join our vibrant learning community. We've got community of learners from, as we found out last week, all over the world. And people can come in, ask questions, talk about their learning experience, and occasionally me and Ken will pop in and we'll have a bit of a chat with people. So come on in and come and visit us. www.counsellingtutor.com with two L's. and what is really useful about this Facebook group is that every week someone puts in a question to be asked. They'll go to the group, people who've never met, and say, can you help me with this question? And the question that we're going to be putting in today, it really is a super question. It asks, is counselling skills, how does counselling skills differ in the real world? In other words, how do we approach clients, and how different is it to working with our peers? And here's the thing. I always say to my learners, you can do counselling skills in a classroom setting till the cows come home. Yes. However, once you get in front of a client, it is completely different. And they say, how so? And I'll tell you how so. It's because you're working with people who know the rules of the game. They'll know how to end on time. They'll know that one person has to speak and one person has to listen. And also, generally speaking, doesn't always happen, but generally speaking, the learners that are working with each other aren't in great distress. You know, that's the big difference. When people are in distress, maybe very upset, maybe crying, maybe, in a very dark place, you need to apply the skills and your way of being in a very different way. And you know what, Ken? Carl Rogers understood this.
Yeah.
And Carl Rogers was one of the first psychologists ever to use tape recordings. And here's the interesting thing. When we talk about tape recordings or recordings, we have recorders on our phones, on our iPads, on every device as a recording device. When he did it, they were huge things with valves and big spinning wheels and tapes and things like that. And he got his learners in the 50s to record the interactions and to then play them back, listen to them, and then look at how the theory of person-centered therapy and the approach worked.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I get it. I do get it that counselling skills, practicing them in a classroom setting, it's a fabricated environment. It's not real. But you are there to practice your skills in a safe environment. And there's a tendency, or maybe a temptation, not a tendency, there's a temptation to rather sit and have a chat rather than practicing your skills and catch up with somebody. And when a tutor comes around to kind of see how you're doing with your skills, quickly go over to oh, really? Is that how you've been feeling then? Here's the thing. You are only a few short hours away from true client contact when you're practicing those skills. If you work out how far away you are from going into placement, and that's how many hours. If you look at each lesson, that's how many hours you are away from being in front of a client. So use the time and really practice your skills. Listen to the recordings, record your skills, listen back, and you're listening to see, how did I use that reflection? How did I use that silence? What did it do within the interaction? And speak about it with your peers and practice your skills. That's what it's really there for, I guess.
Absolutely. And, one observation about counselling skills, I was speaking to someone recently who said that they'd been issued a script. So they played the client and they had a script, and then the other person had to play the therapist. And I said, how did it go? And he said it was awful. It was just awful. Yep. And I said, oh, I'm not surprised, unless you've got a trained actor to kind of think about what it's like to be in grief or loss or whatever the scenario was. Eventually, even someone who's quite good at kind of being imaginative and acting out a scenario is going to run out of backstory. They're going to run out of it. And I've said to my learners, I know it's difficult, but try just talking about something. It could be just anything. And it's amazing how far you get. And I want to share a story with you, Ken, and with the listener, about a little demonstration I did on a level 2 course a few years ago, where I had a learner who said to me, I don't think these work. She was a bit of a doubter. She said, I don't think these work. And she said, I don't believe that you could just talk about something very ordinary and you can get into real depth. And I said, okay. Then I said, if you want to work with me. And she came to the front and she brought a hairbrush.
Yep.
And she said, and she looked, I remember she looked at the group in the little circle and she said, he's not going to get anything out of me. And I didn't do anything other than use counselling skills and myself. And within about 15 minutes, she was talking about stuff that she just never, ever thought about.
Yeah.
At a very deep level. And all it was me reflecting, paraphrasing, using those facilitative conditions, which we're going to come to later in the podcast, of empathy, congruence, unconditional positive regard. And we moved through very quickly. And in fact, that happened in my level 3 class just the other week. The same thing happened. And I said, look, I'll show you, if you use the skills, even something that may not be particularly significant becomes significant. And we have to give a nod to our friends in the psychodynamic world for that, I think.
I'm nodding away here. I'm nodding away. Good story. It is a good story. And I encourage you to bring real material. And first of all, and this is vitally important, is look to your own safety of self first when you're in the classroom and you are bringing material. But if you have somebody that you're working with who's making up a story as they go along, you're going to struggle. Because I think, as you said there, Rory, we're not actors and we can't make up backstories as we go along. And it's incongruent. You're not working with real material. You're being with them in something that does not exist. So try to bring something that is real. It can be as surface as the hairbrush that Rory or your day at work, or your trip through to your learning institution that very day. It doesn't have to be deep material. But you're in there, you're practicing your skills. It is practice. So use the time and practice your skills, and then record it, play it back with your peers, talk about it. What happened when you used that? Did I make a mistake over there? What could I have done differently over here? Use your rating scales, your empathy rating scales, to be able to kind of listen back and see, what was I empathically connected at that point.
Absolutely. I will put some rating scales in the show notes for you to have a look at. We'll put the Karkoff and Clark rating scales in, which are scales that we use at college to look at empathic connection, unconditional positive regard, and empathy. And they're actually there was some research done along the same time as Rogers was around about what that looked like. So we'll make those available as a giveaway, Ken. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea and a great way to end this little chat on skills. I get it. That's for Claire. You asked the question, does anybody else find skills practice completely different to working with real clients? A resounding yes, but you still got to practice those skills. So if you want to get those rating scales, you go to counsellingtutor.com. This is episode 8 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. You can find it simply by clicking the top little tab that says podcast. Go to episode 8 and you can download those rating scales right over there. So moving neatly into theory, I'm excited today because we're going to be looking at the hidden conditions with Rory.
Yes, well, thanks for that, Ken. Yes, it's really interesting. Many years ago, I read a piece of work by Tony Merry, who's a very well-known writer, who talked about the lost conditions. And I'm going to tell you that the core conditions. I'm going to break a bit of a story here, Ken. A bit of breaking news. Carl Rogers never, ever, ever used the term core conditions.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Ask anyone who has studied counselling what psychologist Carl Rogers is best known for, and 9 times out of 10, the reply will be the core conditions, which is interesting if we consider that Rogers never used the term. What Rogers described was 6 necessary sufficient conditions, of which 3 are empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. So why have these conditions become separated and popularised, while the other 3 conditions have become lost or hidden? Well, the answer may lie in how counselling theory is taught and popular misinterpretations of Rogers' work, which has contributed, in my view, to a dilution of theory. Also, when Rogers was brought to the UK, or his work was brought to the UK in the late 1970s, some practitioners, theorists and trainers reinterpreted the model for a UK audience. And I think it's useful to understand that the person-centred approach is used not only in therapy, but also in social work, education, and other areas of care. In fact, I've seen businesses talk about person-centred approach to their business, and I suspect that what they've done is they've taken congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard and used just those portions of Rogers' theory. But to be a therapist, you need to know the 6 conditions. And the 3 conditions that you don't often hear about are sometimes called the lost conditions. So what are they? And are they important? And can we practice fully without understanding them? Well, like with any theory, if we're not equipped with all the information and an understanding of its importance, our understanding and application of it becomes compromised, and I think perhaps arguably unethical. So if Rogers did not use the term core conditions, what did he state was the formula for a therapeutic relationship to be of benefit to clients? Well, we can find a reference to the necessary and sufficient conditions of therapeutic personality change. That's what Rogers called it. In the Journal of Psychology, it was a paper written by Rogers. And he wrote about, as I say, the necessary and sufficient conditions of therapeutic personality change. And he described 6 conditions. And I'm going to read the 6 conditions out, and then I'm going to talk about the hidden conditions. So the first condition is the 2 persons are in psychological contact. The second condition is the first, whom we shall term the client, is in a state of incongruence, being vulnerable or anxious. Third, the second person, whom we shall state the therapist, is congruent or integrated in the relationship. The fourth is the therapist experiences unconditional positive regard for the client. Fifth, the therapist experiences an empathic understanding of the client's internal frame of reference and endeavours to communicate this experience to the client. And the sixth, the communication to the client of the therapist's empathic understanding and unconditional positive regard is to a minimal degree achieved. So those are the 6 conditions. And he goes on to state, no other conditions are necessary. If these 6 conditions exist and continue over a period of time, this is sufficient. The process of constructive personality change will follow. So let's just have a look at these hidden conditions. And to do that, we need to remove condition 3, which is congruence, condition 4, which is unconditional positive regard, and condition 5, which is empathy. And these could be termed as the client's conditions. So the core conditions really are the conditions and the attitudes that the client has to experience from the therapist for the therapy to take place. But we're left with 3 others, and they're usually deemed, or can be deemed, as the therapist conditions. And most importantly, those which ask the therapy to assess if person-centered therapy would be useful or ethically applicable to the client. So we're going to have a look at these hidden conditions. So the first is, are 2 persons in psychological contact? Is the therapist and is the client in psychological contact? So if your client is able to understand what they're embarking on, and can they give informed consent? Barriers to this could be severe mental health issues such as active psychosis, so someone who's actively having a psychotic episode, severe learning difficulties, or attending under the influence of prescribed medication, or mental incapacity due to the use of drugs or alcohol. Now, in my practice years, I've come across a few clients who've come who quite clearly could not make psychological contact because they may have been on very heavy duty prescription medication, and they really didn't understand why they were there or what they were doing. So if you get clients like that, my view is you really can't embark on therapy because there's no psychological contact. And there's something around autonomy and making sure that clients know what they're embarking on. So if psychological contact cannot be made, then there is an ethical issue around autonomy, the ability for the client to make informed choice in contracting with the therapist. So thinking about people who may turn up maybe under the influence of alcohol. Now, I know that some therapists would say that maybe a client may need a drink to pluck the courage up to go and see a therapist. And yes, there are people who function with alcohol. However, if someone comes in and they're so under the influence of alcohol that they don't really know what they're doing, then I think, again, it may be about saying to the client, asking the client respectfully to come back, maybe when they're not so under the influence, and then to assess if they understand what they're getting involved with. Now, the second hidden condition, or the therapist condition, is the first, whom we shall term the client, is in a state of incongruence, being vulnerable or anxious. So does the client have issues to deal with? Can they identify what they would like to look at in therapy? Now, again, some clients come to therapy and in the initial stages, they may not tell you what's on their worried mind. They may tell you rehearsed material. They may tell you about a completely different topic that has absolutely nothing to do in the long run with why they want to access therapy. However, some clients clearly come for other reasons than therapy. And in my practice experience, I've had at least one client who came just to make friends. And I don't want to belittle this person, but she invited me round to her house so I could see her parrot. So, we had to talk about that and explore what is it she wanted from therapy. And it turned out after an hour that actually she just wanted a friend. And I referred her to a befriending service, which was a lot more useful. The other is people come in thinking that you're offering something other than therapy. So in my time, I've had people come in and ask me about debt management, and that's all they wanted to deal with. Could I speak to their bank and sort out a repayment plan or legal advice? I've had at least one person come to my practice who thought I was a lawyer. So again, you have to work out, is the client coming for therapy? And if not, then maybe a referral is needed. The final one is you could get a client's not ready for change, blaming others for their misfortune or not taking responsibility for their actions. Now, in the 7 stages of process model, which I've spoken about in another podcast, clients in the first 2 stages of process tend to be universally blaming of others. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's not my fault, that type of thing. And if you get a client who continually won't take responsibility or won't look at themselves, it's going to be very hard for the person-centred therapy model to work. And I think sometimes you have to give it time. You might have a couple of sessions, and then they may start to begrudgingly say, well, yeah, actually, it is my problem. But there have been clients in the past that I've had, after 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, are still blaming absolutely everybody else, and none of it is anything. They don't have to change. The world has to change around them. And as we know, that isn't how therapy works. Sometimes, people have to realise that they might have to change. And person-centred therapy is a growth model, i.e. change. So if the client is ready for change, again, maybe you have to think about a referral. The last of the hidden conditions, and I think this is the trickiest one, is, as Roger says, the communication to the client of the therapist's empathic understanding and unconditional positive regard is to a minimal degree achieved. Now, this last condition boils down to trust. Does the client trust you? Can the client build a therapeutic relationship with you? And can you build a therapeutic relationship with the client? And if for some reason the client does or will not trust you, then it is very unlikely they'll feel safe enough to discuss what is really on their worried mind. And sometimes that's about transference. It may be the client speaks to you on the phone, sits in front of you, looks at you, and then goes, oh my goodness, you look like, and then they reach into their past and they get part of a relationship they've had in the past and place it on you. So you look like my mother, my father, a lover, that type of thing. And if someone is not seeing you as you, then it's going to be very hard for them to open up. And you can work with that. If you think the client is struggling with transference, and clues here might be things like, oh, you just like my dad. It might be worth exploring. Okay, just tell me a little bit about your dad, and to kind of help the client understand that you're not their dad. And that's again happened to me on more than one occasion. And try and say, look, what feelings are around dad, and it might be they're very malevolent feelings, and to kind of say, well, actually, I'm not your dad. I may just have a passing resemblance to him or sound like him. So trying to be really honest and work in the relationship to try and get the client to see you as you, not a relationship with someone who looks like you in the past. Okay, now it is a tough one, and it may be that no matter how well trained you are and how empathic or hard working in the relationship, the client may not like you. That's it. The client may just not gel, and you may not gel with the client. That's the other thing. You may not gel with the client, and if that's the case, it really is a case of being honest and saying to the client, it feels like you're being a little bit defensive. And the client may say, well, I actually don't feel this is working, maybe. And then what happens is you can say, well, okay, well, maybe a different therapist is what's needed here. Obviously explore why there's a difficulty, but if it can't be resolved, and it's no one's fault, best thing for both parties is to move on and the client to find another therapist. And for those of you who are in training, you may well have experienced this in terms of your supervisor. You may have interviewed a number of supervisors and just not gelled with a supervisor for whatever reason. So, we're human beings, and when we're talking about very intimate and maybe difficult parts of our lives, all the conditions have to be in place. So those are the hidden conditions. And so next time that someone says to you, oh, Carl Rogers, the core conditions, now you've heard this podcast, you can reliably inform them that it's not 3, it's 6.
Well, there's some more stuff for your assignments there. I love how you really give us the background, Rory, and a true understanding there of those hidden conditions.
Oh, thanks for that, Ken. Yeah, and it's, as I say, they are hidden. It's amazing how, as Tony Murray said, old wine in new bottles, people just taking the core conditions, just taking those 3 and packaging them off as if it's the ultimate thing. And of course, as therapists, as I explained in the earlier bit, they're not. We've got to have all 6 in place to be ethical and thoughtful therapists. So, Ken, what have you got for us today in terms of skills with Ken?
Well, today we're going to be looking at immediacy. And I guess immediacy is often misunderstood as a skill, what it actually is, how it works, and what place it has within the counselling relationship. So without any further ado, let's go and have a good look at that.
Counselling Skills with Ken Kelly.
Let's take a look at immediacy. Now, immediacy is an advanced counselling skill. This is something that you would only be looking at using if the relational depth had been formed and there was a great trust bond within the relationship. And the reason for that is to use immediacy can be risky. The payoff, if immediacy does hit home with the client, is immense. There will be an immense feeling that they have been heard, understood, but it is risky. And if you get immediacy wrong, which sometimes happens and will happen, if you're using this as a skill regularly with clients, you will get it wrong from time to time. And when you get it wrong, it kind of fractures the relationship just for a few moments. It's kind of, the client might go, no, you really don't get me here. That is totally off. And you need the trust and you need the relational depth to be able to move past that. So it's not something that you would maybe use in a first session or in the beginning of a session with a client. So what is immediacy? Well, if we look particularly to person-centered counseling, the person-centered approach suggests that we are 100% in the client's frame of reference, that we don't bring our frame of reference into the counseling session at all, except when it comes to immediacy. Immediacy is something that comes up in you as the counselor. It's a gut feel. Now, we all know the gut feel, that feeling you get that I guess can't be explained, it can't be measured. We're talking now metaphysical. Some might call it a hunch. And in counseling, it's referred to as immediacy. So you're basically going to be revealing how you, as the counselor, are thinking or feeling or sensing. And out of those words, the strongest for me is sensing, because if you are there in that client's world, seeing it as they do, you're going to sense and you're going to feel it rather than think it. So it's very human. It's very human because you're sharing a little bit of you, what you see, how this looks to you. So let me just give you an example here, just to take the woolliness away. You're working with a client, and the client is bringing their material, and it's irrelevant what the material is here. But within you, as the client is bringing this material, you look at this client, and all of a sudden, the client to you appears to be like a little lost boy who's bringing this information to you. Immediacy is right there in the here and now, immediately sharing that with the client and saying, you know, as you say that, I can't help but sense that as you're giving that information, you look like a little lost boy. Now, that's not within the client's frame of reference. It's not even on the client's edge of awareness. That is 100% within your frame of reference as the counselor. But it's a hunch, it's a feeling, it's something that is strong, and it is very present within the counseling relationship, and you share that. When it hits home, when the client takes that and go, you know what? That's exactly how it feels. I feel like I'm 7 years old again. Unbelievable. And then there's a silence. As the client really goes there, that means that immediacy has hit home. The resonance is absolutely magnificent. It fits. And it was shared from your frame of reference, from your awareness, from a feeling. You know, if we're in these relationships with clients and we're forming these deep emotional bonds, we're sharing their emotional lives, we have deep empathic understanding of where they're at, we're going to feel stuff, and we can share that as long as, of course, the counseling relationship is well formed and really nicely established. So if immediacy goes wrong and you say, you know, as you're sharing that, I can't just help but feel, you know, it almost looks like you're a little boy bringing that information. And the client looks at you quizzically, kind of completely pulled out of where they were at. You've got it wrong. And it's okay to get it wrong. And what I would do in that situation is I would say, it looks like I got that wrong and you're not there at all. And it invites the client to kind of share where they are at and put you firmly, squarely back into their frame of reference. So immediacy, you need trust within the relationship. You need boundaries to have been well established before you're going to be bringing that in. It is a part of you that you are sharing with the client. When it resonates and when it hits, it is highly effective, and it really does take the counselling relationship to a completely new level. It is, I guess, in a way linked into idiosyncratic empathy that we've covered in previous skills sessions, where it's unique. It's going to be unique to the situation. It's going to be unique to the client. When you feel it, because here's the thing, you're going to feel immediacy building up within you when you're in a session. When you feel it and you've got that filter that goes in of, should I say this? Should I not say this? Should I say this? Should I not say this? You're not 100% there in the moment. What I would suggest is dive in. Take the plunge, try it, share that gut feel that you have with that client that you've been working with for some time, where the relationship is deep and trusting, and see what happens. It is a magical and very, very powerful skill, immediacy, and it takes, like all the other skills, it takes time to develop. It is difficult to use immediacy when you are doing simulated skill sessions, when you're sitting in a classroom, because you don't really have the opportunity to get to the relational depth where immediacy would be appropriate to use in a classroom environment, because you may be working with one colleague one week and then changing over and working with somebody else the next week, whereas with a client, you're seeing them on a regular basis, and that relationship is deepening, it is developing. Try immediacy, trust yourself, and see what it does within your counselling relationships.
Well, that is just so useful, Ken. And immediacy is just such an underrated skill, and I think it's one that really, really does need lots of thought about it, because it can, as you kind of say in the podcast, can go a bit of a awry, but really important and really does help build that therapeutic relationship, which, strangely enough, brings us to Ask Ken and Rory.
It does indeed.
It does. It brings us. And it's from Zoe Schreier, I think is the correct pronunciation in my dyslexic eyes. And she says, I'm doing an assignment and the question is basic as, what is therapeutic process? Could someone please help me write down in an assignment paragraph? I'm finding the assignment difficult somehow. Well, I think that's interesting.
Yep.
And it would pivot on, for me, what modality of therapy you were working with. If you're using person-centered therapy, then you could draw from things like the 7 stages of process, 19 propositions. You could talk about empathy and unconditional positive regard.
Good.
If you're working with TA, then I think it would probably be about contact, about working with the ego states and how you approach the ego states. I'm not a TA therapist, but my good friend Bob Cook would talk about, trying to find the adult, trying to identify the child. And in CBT, it would be, I think, about irrational thinking and decision making. In fact, decision making in TA and CBT are much the same idea, in that you're asking people to make different decisions based on their perception. So it would very, very much be useful to know what modality of therapy you were looking at, and also, of course, there's the intersubjective relationship that was talked about in Gestalt. So it would be interesting to know which one you were doing.
Indeed. And I guess I can speak from person-centered counselling perspective. That is my base modality. And looking at this, for me, it's the process of counselling, where a client comes in and how they process through the various stages. Roger's put it so beautifully in the 7 stages of process, where when a client is coming in, you kind of looking at where they're at, and you're looking at where they're at not in a judgmental way. And it's interesting because, we say that person-centered counselling is non-directive and that there is no assessment, but of course there is an assessment. If you're looking to the 7 stages of process, you're assessing where the client may be within their journey. And he speaks about going from rigidity to fluidity and becoming a more fully functioning person. So it's about looking, where is the client when they come in? getting an idea of what their world looks like, and how does that change as they process or progress through the therapy?
Absolutely, Ken. And the other thing I'd say, and it's not really a person-centered idea, but also transference and counter-transference. I talk a lot about it in my teachings. And although it's, as I say, it's not a person-centered idea as such, it is something that happens. So if you're working with someone who is projected onto you, maybe they see you as a parent, or maybe as a past love, when we talked about transference, bringing an aspect of a relationship from your past and putting it onto someone that you've never met. Sometimes that's very useful. But that, I think, would be more for TA and dealt rather than person-centered therapy. Yes, and I always say, if we talk about the person-centered therapy, is that little circle that I draw on the board and have done for years, where it starts off by saying, nobody likes me. Yeah, people stay away from me. I'm not loved. People don't like me, and you go round and round and round this. And part of the process is to replace that people don't like me with the therapist. And if you place the therapist in that circle, what you've got now is people don't like me. I now feel respected. Yeah. And maybe that people won't be pushed away so much. They won't push away. And it's that little circle of breaking that little circle where someone feels that someone in the world cares for them, that they're heard, not just listened to, but heard, that really experienced, and everything that they're experiencing is experienced by the therapist, can make such a difference in their life. And that really is the process.
100%. Breaking that self-defeating cycle that just keeps on going around by bringing the therapist into that and changing how a perception is made. And I guess for me as well, process goes beyond the counselling room. You will work with a client, and they stand up and they say thank you at the end and they walk out. But their process doesn't stop there. It continues within their head, within their day, how they look at things. They may be taking elements that they discussed within the session. There may be things that they didn't discuss in the session that fall into awareness because they are more open to that. So the process within the client continues definitely outside of the counselling relationship. And I certainly have had many a client that would come back in to their next session and say, since we last spoke, this has happened. They have gone and processed on their own. They are, it's that organismic awareness. That's what it's about. It's kind of going from that rigidity to fluidity, as Roger's described it.
Absolutely, Ken. And also the counselling process exists within the supervision relationship. So again, when you're working with a client, you may go to supervision, you take the client to supervision, your supervisor may ask you, who is this client? Tell me about this client. I want to know about them. And part of that process may actually exist outside the therapeutic engagement. It exists with the supervisor, who then heightens your awareness, heightens your understanding of what's going on for the client, and then you take that back into the next session and connect even closer to your client.
I love it. I really do. I love the question. What is therapeutic process? How can you define that? And I can see, just looking on the Facebook feed here where the question was asked, there's so many people that have chipped in and given their thoughts and their feelings. So I challenge you to speak to your peers. Have a think. What does therapeutic process? What does it mean to you? Debate it, discuss it, get these conversations going. Let's drill down into what we're learning, not just read something on a textbook page and take that as a given. Let's talk about it. Let's rip it apart. Let's examine it. And I think that's what this is all about. And we hope that you will come and join us in our Facebook group. Easy to find, counsellingtutor.com. Just click on the Facebook tab and we will let you in.
Absolutely. Just knock on the door and we'll be there.
Well, that kind of brings us to the end of episode 8 of the Counselling Tutor podcast. We've loved being here for you guys. We love your questions. Keep them coming in. From me, thank you and catch you next time.
And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.